Welcome everyone. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So good afternoon everyone and welcome to this special FightMND scientific seminar. My name is Sarah Bennett and I'm the research coordinator at FightMND. Thank you so much for joining us today. So today's presentation is going to be a bit different from our previous scientific seminars. Instead of bringing you a presentation on the latest MND research, we pause to present to you the FightMND cure and care strategies, which will underpin our investment into research and care initiatives for the next 5 years. Following the talk today, we are leaving plenty of time for discussion and questions. So if you would like to ask anything, please use the reaction button to raise your hand, and one of our team will enable your microphone and camera and let you know to ask your question. Alternatively, you can also type your question into the chat where our team will be monitoring and read out questions on your behalf. Please note, however, that the chat function is only enabled if you are using the app-based version of Teams and unfortunately doesn't work if you're on the web-based version. Please do ensure that you introduce yourself and where you're from before asking your question. So now to our presenter for today. Dr. Beck Sheehan has a PhD completed at the Florey Institute of Neuroscience and Mental Health in 2012, as well as a graduate certificate in clinical research. After continuing her PhD into MND as a postdoctoral fellow for a few years, Dr. Sheehan joined FightMND in 2016 to run its Developing Research Grants program. Now the Director of Cure Research and Programs at FightMND, Dr. Sheehan oversees a team which has delivered almost $70 million into care research funding and $7 million in care initiatives. The exciting growth of MND research and care in Australia and internationally presents with it a challenge into how FightMND is best positioned to support programs to achieve the Foundation's overall objective of finding better treatments and ultimately a cure for MND. Dr. Sheehan is here today to discuss the process behind establishing our new research strategy and what it means in terms of our investments going forward. So over to you, Beck.
Thanks, Sarah. Just share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that. I haven't heard anything negative, so we're going to continue.
All good.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. And we're obviously hijacking the seminar series to talk about our cure and care strategies. But I think it's really critical to have this conversation and this presentation with you all. These strategies were shaped by you and are for you. So these strategies are really about how we can best support cure and care research here in Australia and globally as well. So just to give an overview of what I'll be talking about today. So firstly, our cure research strategy, and just acknowledging an enormous amount of work by consultant Ashley Coleman-Bock, who worked closely with me on this project over the last 6 to 12 months. So I'll be providing some background around FightMND's current strategy or previous strategy, some information around the process to how we help shape this strategy, a snapshot of the state of MND research as discussed with the research community, as well as our investment principles and priorities that sit underneath the strategy. I'll also be presenting on FightMND's care strategy and acknowledging Rosie Harris and Jamie Craig, a consultant who worked on this strategy. And I'll be presenting the global MND care research progress, as well as the investment and principles and priorities that sit underneath the care strategy. So firstly, presenting some background around the cure research strategy. And in order to do this, I can't begin without not mentioning the incredible Dr. Ian Davis. So for people who don't know Ian, he is one of the founders at FightMND. He was diagnosed with MND when he was just 33 years of age and died of MND back in 2018. So I joined FightMND to work underneath Ian. Ian was a cancer doctor when he was diagnosed with MND, and he was really frustrated with the way that following his diagnosis that there was no opportunities for him to participate in clinical trials. And even as the years went past, there was no new potential therapies coming through the pipeline here in Australia. So Ian was really instrumental in shaping the strategy, the way that we invested in research here in Australia and with the funds raised through FightMND. And his dream was really that anyone who's diagnosed with MND in the future should have that opportunity to participate in clinical trials and also to create a pipeline of drugs so that if a trial isn't effective, that there's potential new treatments always coming through the pipeline. So looking back over the evolution of our research strategy, back in 2015 and 2016, we outsourced our investment. So we invested broadly in MND research through MND Research Australia, or formerly MND RIA. And in 2017, we began insourcing, so running our own research grant program. And this is when I joined FightMND. So this program was really targeted at investing in the drug pipeline, and particularly the Valley of Death, so that late stage drug development that leads into clinical trials. We're also invested in clinical trials to give Australians access to participate in clinical research. And we also invested in hosting a research symposium back in 2018. From there in 2019, we continued to grow our area of investment by supporting early and mid-career researchers through fellowships. And this was done on a 3-year basis. So each year, every 3 years, we'd fund a new fellow. And then in 2019, it was about diversifying. So what we really learned over that previous couple of years is that there are a number of reasons why clinical trials have failed. And so we introduced our impact grants, which are really investing in research to address the challenges of translation. And then from 2022, we've expanded our research strategy investment areas further. We've had more focus on discovery, so we've opened up discovery grants, so investing in understanding the causes of MND, as well as supporting collaborative initiatives and increasing our investment in capacity building here in Australia to annual investment. A bit of an overview about our research strategy project. This was a 6 to 12 month project I worked on with Ashley Coleman-Bock, an external consultant, and we conducted over 35 interviews. So firstly, thank you to anyone in the audience who participated in those interviews who really helped to shape the strategy. So conducting those interviews, we met with stakeholders, including basic and clinical researchers, people within industry or industry experience, investment in organisations that invested in research, other MND organisations, and other disease group organisations as well, where there's been success in impact through research. We also analysed research strategies from peer organisations, so global MND organisations, but also other similar disease groups like dementia and MS. Then we worked to pull together the information that we collected, identify critical questions and priority areas, and then we developed a draft research strategy, which we then presented back to a subgroup of those stakeholders to really test where we were landing. And then from there, incorporated that feedback into developing the final version of the strategy. So during the early stages of the interview process, we started to hear some really common themes about the challenges of MND research. And from this, the first thing that we did was change the framework that we use to talk about MND research. So previously, we've been focusing on talking about grants and projects. And what we've started to do now with this framework here is to talk about the challenges we face or the steps that we need to take to get to our vision of a world without MND. And these are to understand the incidence of the disease, not just locally here in Australia, and not just in major cities of developed countries, but a clear understanding of the incidence and potential variance in incidence globally. We also need a better understanding of the classification of the types of MND and the potential stratification of these subgroups. We need to understand the cause or causes of MND, what factors are involved that increase the risk or potentially contribute to the prevention of the disease. And we need to continue to grow our understanding of the progression of the disease, how to stop or slow MND from progressing, and then through this need to develop better treatments for the disease. What we heard from our interviewees when we looked at the global MND research ecosystem through the lens of this framework is that there's a significant gap in these first 3 steps of the understanding of MND, and there's limited investment in research in these areas as well. And these gaps are having a major impact on research progress. So, for example, if we look at classification of MND, currently the field lacks a consistent approach to classification. And what we heard is that this can be varied, or there can be varied approaches between countries, also between clinical sites and even between clinicians at the same site. And the gaps in understanding the classification of MND can lead to inaccurate prognosis, but also poor stratification of patients into trials. We've also heard that there's a huge increase in research activity at this step in drug development and clinical trials. And while there has been this increase in investment in this space, there's still significant gaps in our understanding of disease progression, including the identification of really strong validated progression markers and disease heterogeneity, but also clinical translation, which includes trial design and preclinical models and the role of precision medicine in MND. So along the top of the slide here, you can see the percentage investment from FightMND since 2014. And what you can see is a significant level of investment at this treatment end. And this is in line with our previous strategy. And it was very interesting to hear that interviewees reported that this investment in this space has filled a really important gap in late-stage drug development and early-stage clinical trials. So we wanted to keep that in mind when we were looking at where to invest going forward. So what we heard through the interviews was a really strong momentum and optimism for progress. So interviewers really believed MND research has progressed significantly over the last 5 to 10 years, and that there's growing attention and funding is really driving this optimism for progress. There was a sense that a meaningful breakthrough in MND knowledge or treatments is possible within the timeframe of decades, and that this growing attention and funding, whether it be through the Ice Bucket Challenge or government support like the £50 million UK government investment in MND, is really driving this optimism and momentum in the field. Looking at areas of progress, some of the key areas identified were around genes and genetic discoveries or genetic therapies, bioinformatic capabilities, omics studies, advances in imaging, as well as disease models, so progress in animal models, as well as the use of iPSCs for sporadic disease. And some of the key discoveries were around discovery of genes such as C9, the use of sporadic models of MND, and other genetic technologies as well. So as well as identifying areas for optimism, interviewees highlighted a range of research challenges that exist globally in MND research. And we were able to capture these under 4 key headings. So research, grow, connect, and build. So under research, we had researcher information overload, and that's really about with the rapid increase in investment in research. This is paired with an increase in the amount of data, the information collected, that it's becoming a real challenge for researchers to stay abreast of everything that's happening globally, and also to step back and say, what does it mean? What have we learnt? It's also the challenge of data and information transparency. An example of this is the lack of visibility into clinical trials. So with the resistance to publishing any negative results or negative outcomes of trials, this means that researchers don't have the opportunity to review this and learn from mistakes or failures. And there's a need to also publish why the trial or why the program has failed, whether it's because it was poorly designed, there was a lack of significant funding to allow it to progress, or the actual results that the drug being tested or the pathway being investigated just wasn't relevant for MND. There's also the challenge of the lack of direction and focus in research funding. So we've seen an increase in funding through a number of initiatives such as the Ice Bucket Challenge, but there hasn't been a global targeted approach and direction to allocating that research funding. And what that means is that many organisations are looking at investing in similar areas, and there's duplication of efforts. Challenges of translation issues, which everybody on this call is very aware of. And the last one is around imprecise impact measurement. And it's something that we've been looking at FightMND for a number of years, is how we measure the impact that our investment in research is having. And what we've heard is that there's currently no standard framework or approach to measuring impact successfully. And most interviewees actually found it really difficult to articulate how they measured impact. when we spoke about impact, a lot of the measurements were actually outcome measures. So things like numbers of papers published, number of patients recruited into a clinical trial, rather than the impact that a study such as the generation of knowledge or the change in a policy may have come out of the research. So under GROW, the challenges are around limitation on workforce capacity and capability, the struggle of funding researchers and keeping great researchers in MND, and that retention rate and that supporting researchers at all stages of their career so that they can commit to a career in MND. Under CONNECT, some of the challenges include limited industry involvement. So we know that if we're going to support clinical research, if we're going to look at a drug becoming approved for MND, that industry involvement is critical and it won't happen without them. But this requires industry involvement or engagement at all stages of the process, and the earlier the better. So what the challenge is how do we encourage researchers and industry to engage and connect earlier on? And I think this is particularly important here in Australia, where access to big pharma is much more limited than overseas. There's also the challenges of international collaboration and working internationally. So we know to cure MND or to solve MND, the problem, that the puzzle that is MND, that we need to work across national borders, particularly when we're looking at large clinical trials, that we need a large number of patients and diversity of patients to be involved in the research. And this is also particularly important for studies such as genetic studies, where it's important to work increasingly in underrepresented communities, which currently isn't happening. And so what the challenge is that there's this real opportunity to improve the speed and outcomes of research through greater collaboration, but this requires investment in things like networks, digital infrastructure, better mechanisms for information and knowledge sharing, and also access to or agreement to open science standards. Underbuild some of the challenges were underfunding of research infrastructure. This is a very common issue in MND research here in Australia and globally. And this includes funding for things like databases, registries, biobanks, repositories, and that access to that funding is really limited. Also underbuild that challenge of that reliance on traditional investment models, and that's that grant-based funding. That's really the way that research is funded, particularly here in Australia. But there are new investment models that can be used, and this can include models such as blue sky open research calls and engagement with venture philanthropy as well. And there's a need for a portfolio mindset using these methods rather than just grant-based research. And then the last one is the challenge around contract delays over IP and data ownership. This is a conversation I have regularly with researchers here in Australia. The time it takes to sign an agreement between multiple institutions or organisations, even here in Australia, is incredibly challenging, and the delays are really, really unreasonable given the time for a person with MND. So really, it's about how we overcome that challenge and fast track any of those issues. So taking on board what we heard in the interviews and through our research, we developed our strategy to take on some of these challenges. And what we've come up with is 4 pillars of investment, or 4 areas that we're looking to invest to overcome these challenges and support research here in Australia and globally. So these are research, connect, build and grow. And so research is about investing in understanding the incidence, classification and causes of MND, and also investing in translating this knowledge into a cure. With Connect, it's about investing in knowledge sharing, so investing in projects that increase collaboration across researchers, across research disciplines, across institutions and borders. Investing in research enablers and infrastructure through Build, and this is the data, equipment, buildings, the tech that enable high quality research to occur. And also investing in Grow, so building our workforce capability and capacity as well. So I'll just take you through this slide because it is quite busy. We have our investment model, and these are our 4 investment priorities: research, connect, build, and grow. And then sitting underneath that is what this funds, so the type of initiatives that this funds. Then where the fund primarily focuses. So for research and connect, these are really about global and local investments. So supporting our researchers here, but connecting them with international researchers, partnering with other institutes, organisations, research funders to ensure that we're not duplicating events, but instead working together towards that common goal. And then build and grow is really about supporting locally. So building the infrastructure, building the workforce that supports the research. And we do this, we invest in these areas through a range of initiatives, and these are shown here at the bottom. So starting under research, we've got 4 initiatives that we're looking at, so that we're going to be supporting. So the first one is continuing to support our translational grant program. And then the second one is around a disease fundamentals grant program. And this will be establishing a program of grants that's focused on funding early stage disease research. And this includes studies into incidence, classification of the disease, or looking into the causes of MND. We're also looking at supporting a research standards grant program. And this is supporting grants that are focused on funding research to establish standards for high quality research. So this includes agreed data standards, agreed terminology, and things like preferred mouse models for particular types of studies. And the last one under research is the development of an impact assessment framework for M&D research investment. And this would enable M&D research funders to assess the impact of the money invested of the research outcomes produced. And this means that once we know where we're having the most impact, that we can work out whether or not we need to adjust the way that we're investing in the research ecosystem. So through investing in Connect, we'll be looking at funding 3 key initiatives. The first one is 2 types of M&D reports: a State of the Globe M&D report and a State of the Nation M&D report. So the State of the Globe report is really about every 2 years creating a report on what we've learned over that 2 years in M&D. What have been the key summary, the key discoveries and the key findings, and what does that mean for the research ecosystem, and where to head to next. And the State of the Nation report is about progress specific here in Australia, but also just an update on what's happening in Australia and here and where and who's involved. The Global M&D Research Standards Committee is an initiative that we would look to work with an international recognised M&D body to establish a committee that would establish research standards. And this can include things such as best practice animal models, preferred terminology, even data storage standards, and that these would be available via open access to M&D researchers. And the aim is that this committee, by establishing, would aim to support the establishment of this committee, as well as communicating the endorsed opinions of the committee as well. Through investment in Build, we've got a number of initiatives and programs that we're looking to support. The first one is around the project to reduce the contractual legal barriers. And it is a really important one because it's a problem or a challenge that we hear, across Australia and around the world. And we've seen projects that we've funded be delayed for 18 months to 2 years. So it is a really big challenge, and one that we believe will take time to overcome, but will have major impact if we are able to overcome it. The other initiatives include a Centre of Excellence grant program, and this program is focused on developing research centres of excellence. So these will become a centralised facility or a centralised centre for doing research. So rather than recreating whether it be animal models or systems or assays that are run really regularly at an excellent standard at a particular lab or institute, that researchers would then partner with that program rather than recreating things in their own lab. And I think a really good example of this is the facility that Mary Louise Rogers is created at Flinders University, which is a M&D specific biomarker facility. So rather than all researchers running lots of different studies within their own lab and the costs of setting up and running them in their own individual lab. It's about working and partnering with these centres of excellence. We're also looking at supporting a national patient registry as well as a national clinical trial network. And that's really, and you'll see sort of in the next couple of slides that we're really looking at shifting and moving away from funding individual trials, but instead looking at supporting the infrastructure that sits underneath the clinical trial. Australia has become a really attractive place to run clinical trials for MND, so making sure that we're doing that or supporting that in the most efficient way possible. And I think hand in hand with the clinical trial network also comes the patient registry and the potential of a national platform trial as well. Then through investing in GROW, it's about supporting our Australian researchers at every stage of their career through our academic awards program. So we offer PhD scholarships, early and mid-career research fellowships. We also offer a clinical investigator award, and we also, within that program, will also support opportunities for researchers to upskill their capability and learn from other areas of research as well. Also under GROW, we're looking at supporting a workforce capability grant program, and that will include things such as opportunities for researchers to do a placement within industry or within the lab if they're based in the clinic, as well as opportunities for exchange to visit other labs to learn other techniques from other research institutes, both nationally and internationally. So how will we invest in these initiatives? And it's really about using two investment vehicles. So the first one is what we call initiatives, and this is quite different to the way that we would support a grant, in that it's an area or initiative that's been identified through the strategy that FightMND feels strongly about supporting. So from this, it's about us connecting with the right people, the right teams of people to deliver on these initiatives, and supporting them ongoing in a more collaborative approach. And then grants is the other investment vehicle, which will be as a regular grant program, where a call for applications in a particular area will then deliver a competitive grant process. We also have an innovation fund, which will sit across all four of these key focus areas. And the innovation fund will be like a seed fund. So it will be for novel ideas with limited preliminary data. And it's all about getting fresh ideas off the ground. And we have a number of ideas around how this fund will work, but we're also speaking with a number of other organisations who run similar types of funds to see where we can potentially partner, or where we can look at different ways of doing things. So what it means for our grant schemes, this flowchart shows our existing grant programs down this side, our future grant programs here, and then the components that make up the grant programs. Just to go through what the colours and everything mean. So the grey is our current programs to be modified. This dark grey is our decommissioned grant program, and this is our clinical trial program that I mentioned before. So going forward over the next couple of years, we'll look to move away from that funding of individual trials, but instead look at funding the infrastructure of the trial to support the trial being run here in Australia. So looking at, then the blue will be our modified grant program with the new strategy, and then the green is a new grant program that's being created as part of the new strategy. So currently our discovery, impact and drug development grants will become our disease fundamental grant program to look at incidence classification and cause of MND, and then our translation grant program, which will look at our early and late stage drug development grants, as well as grants to support investigating methods and approaches for drug delivery. We'll be introducing our research standards grant program, which is the program as described earlier around developing best practice standards for research. Our fellowships and scholarships program will remain much the same. It will become our academic awards program, so fellowships and scholarships, as well as including now professional development. And we'll also have a workforce capability grant program, which will offer opportunities for researchers to experience a foreign or national exchange scheme, as well as a cross-skilling scheme, which is that getting experience in the research ecosystem outside of your sort of regular position or regular role. Then our our collaborative initiative grants and our other existing infrastructure grants are moving towards a future grant program, which is our Centre of Excellence grant program. And this will include a number of sort of infrastructure type projects that we've funded in the past, including things like the drug screening platform, the brain bank, and SALSA. And then we'll also be introducing the Innovation Fund, which will be the seed funding program. So now I've given you a big lot of information about the CURE strategy. I'm going to switch directions a little bit and talk a bit about our care research strategy. So historically, we've invested primarily into research for a cure, and in care, we've committed over $6.9 million into care, but this has been through the support of the state associations and MND clinics to purchase assistive equipment for people with MND. And we know that while we're searching for a cure and that there's been developments in the cure space, that this is going to lead to increases in life expectancy and quality of life. And so research into care and best practice care has never been more critical. So our care strategy will guide our investments in care over the coming 3 years, and it was developed in a similar sort of approach to the CURE research strategy. And so our team conducted both local and international interviews and research. We involved MND Association, people with lived experience, researchers, peer organisations and clinicians. And again, thank you to those in the audience who participated in those interviews to help shape this strategy. So first, a look at the global MND care research progress. So really the feeling in the MND care sector is that MND care research is the sector that has experienced significant underinvestment, and this is a global problem. And because of this underinvestment, it's an underdeveloped area, but it's also nascent. And this has created a strong sense of optimism for growth and progress in the area with targeted investment in care research. So some of the key areas of progress that were identified through the interviews, excuse me, globally include the development of guidelines. So here in Australia, we don't have guidelines, but a number of countries have developed care guidelines. Improvement and increased uptake of telehealth. That was, I think, a direct result of a positive direct result of COVID. Understanding the impact of compassionate communities and progress around the multidisciplinary approach to care. Some of the key breakthroughs reported include non-invasive ventilation and NAI, discoveries around nutrition and metabolism, and advances in assistive technology. And then some of the priority research areas identified are around clinical interventions such as NIV or saliva management, the development of decision-making tools for care, models of care, psychological support, as well as carer burden. And then through the interviews, we also identified a range of MND care research challenges, and we were again able to group these under those 4 key headings of research, build, connect, and grow. So under research, the first one around biased funding culture and mechanisms, and that's really that looking at existing grants or funding bodies, that there tends to be a bias towards funding cure-related projects, with care being unable to meet cure-related criteria or being deemed of lower quality. This means that care researchers have poor access to funding, and this is resulting in limited research capacity in the space. There's also challenges around limited information sharing, so that lack of global visibility into care research and limited avenues to share results or research outcomes. And so this continues to have risks around duplications of efforts and poor global translation of benefits. There's also the challenge of a lack of common direction, similar to what I spoke about in the cure research space. It's that many MND organisations or care researchers are working in silos rather than collaborating internationally. And again, the challenge of the impact measurements framework, and this is important for care research as well. Other challenges around build is the disparate models of care. So even here in Australia, there are state-by-state differences in the models of care, and this has led to differences in how care is delivered and the quality of care that people across Australia are receiving. And there's a challenge of how to leverage the digital channels and engage with remote communities also remains a major challenge. Other challenges around build is poor data transparency. So this limited investment in that research, care research enablers, things like registries and databases, has contributed to poor understanding of the care research and the learnings from the care research. Challenges around Connect are really looking at limited collaboration across the domestic and global MND research community, really just knowing who's who in the zoo or who's who in the care research ecosystem, both here in Australia and globally as well. And there's also been a limited or minimal collaboration with people with lived experience and lived experience community with researchers to really understand or tie the research back into their needs. And then under Grow, the challenges identified really around gaps in workforce capacity, capability and incentives. And this is a huge challenge for the care research space. That this is really caused by a combination of high workload. So people who work within clinics are very busy with their clinical demands. And also they have limited access to funding from funding bodies to invest in key research. So there's not a lot of incentive to dedicate their time away from their clinical requirements to do really good research. And so this lack of focus and underinvestment has led to a very small cohort of care researchers and instead a wider workforce of clinicians who don't have MND research experience or capabilities. So at FightMND, we've developed a care strategy. We always talk at FightMND about fighting the beast or taking down the beast. And our care strategy is what we call taming the beast. So while we're searching for that cure, how do we keep the beast at bay through supporting care? And we're doing that through investment across 3 key pillars, and these are evidence, standards, and support. So under evidence, it's about supporting or investing in care-focused research to inform best practice care. Under standards, it's about investing in the development of national care guidelines for Australians. And support is about investing in targeted support for people who are impacted by MND today. So looking at the while we invest in those sort of 3 key pillars, we have 4 areas of investment, and you'll see some common themes from the cure strategy in that we have investment in research, so research projects and grants, which is about investing in grants or initiative which target innovation in care and also help to develop evidence to inform MND care guidelines. Investing in Connect, so supporting networks and communities by investing in projects that increase collaboration, and that's between researchers, disciplines, but also people with lived experience as well. Investing in Build, so those research enablers and infrastructure that enable high quality research to occur, as well as investing in workforce capability, so investing in the learning, development and experiences of the care research workforce here in Australia. Okay, so this image presents the initiatives that we've identified to support. So we have our 3 key pillars across the top here, and then we have our 4 areas of focus around research, connect, grow and build. And many of these initiatives are already underway. For example, under Pillar 1 in evidence, we're investing in a program of care research, and we have our care research grants, which are currently open and they close at the end of this month, so very, very soon. And this program includes an annual grant round, which is focused on funding the critical gaps in care guidelines, as well as research into innovation in care. Then under Pillar 2, Standards will invest in research through the support of national care guidelines for people with MND. And then to support this under GROW, we will be investing in funding the establishment of competency frameworks for key professionals within the MND care workforce. And so this framework will be able to support things like professional development, role design and recruitment efforts to grow or hire for the right capabilities to care for people with MND. And then to further support this under Build, we'll invest in supporting the establishment of a portal which provides that single source of truth for the National MND Care Guidelines and all the related collateral, including standards, competency frameworks and educational materials that sit underneath that. Excuse me. And then under Pillar 3 support, we'll be investing in, under Build, we'll be investing in or providing annual funding for grants, which will focus on improving the quality of life for people living with and people affected by MND. And this investment is across 4 main areas. So these have been identified as priority areas. So these include people with MND over the age of 64, so people who don't have access to support through the NDIS. Information for people with MND, whether it be written online information, access to workshops, webinars, information sources, equipment, technology and at-home needs for people with MND, and support for families and carers of people with MND, and that can be different types of support, including psychological support. Additionally, under these support grants, we'll also support innovation in support as well. And then there are a number of initiatives that we will support that sit across the 3 pillars. So we'll support the development of an impact assessment framework for MND care research, MND care research standards and support. And this will enable FightMND and other investors to, other funders to assess the impact of the money invested on the outcomes produced through this investment. And we'll provide every 2 years, provide funding every 2 years for the delivery of a survey for people with lived experience. And this will identify the desires of people from that community and supports prioritisation of their needs. And this can then be shared back to MND associations, also to clinicians or care researchers, to ensure that care priorities and research are focused on lived experience needs. We'll also look at supporting conference sponsorship, and that's where funding is for knowledge sharing or collaboration initiatives in Australia that are focused on care research. And we'll also be supporting annual funding to enable Australians with lived experience to travel to local and global care conferences and symposiums. So just to summarise, through the cure and care research strategies, what we're really looking at doing is to invest in research in a way that really delivers innovation and impact in MND research, but also that it supports the MND research community and particularly the Australian MND research community. And this can be done through direct funding, so funding of fellowships and scholarships directly to researchers, but also through investing in building capacity and capability. So increasing the number of great people working in the space and then providing them an opportunity to grow and learn across the MND research ecosystem to really fast track any progress in research. Also supporting the research community by supporting that critical infrastructure that supports the research, so that researchers have everything that they need at their fingers to be able to deliver the research that they want to do. We're also looking at supporting opportunities for collaboration, so both nationally and globally as well. And also looking through this investment to engage people within the MND community more closely in research. So I'm going to finish there and stop for some questions. Really looking forward to hearing people's thoughts or any feedback around how you feel about how this landed, and also any questions you have about the direction that we're taking going forward.
Thanks so much, Beck. There's a lot of information for everyone to take on board. So we have a question Firstly, from Mary Louise. Let me just... Okay, Mary Louise, you should be able to do camera and mic now.
Okay. Thank you, Beck. I just missed that bit about the Centre for Excellence. Can you just explain? Sorry, I missed that because I got the timings wrong for South Australia.
That's okay, Mary Louise. I'm happy to go through it with you. But really, it'll be the Centre of Excellence program will be like an infrastructure grant program. So it'll be a sort of a grant program that you'll apply for. But it'll be really focused on showing that this will be a national centre for that type of research or that type of program. So it'll be about showing that you've got national collaboration as supporting that as the centre to do, in your case, a biomarker research.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. That's great.
Yes, thank you, Mary Louise. Any other questions from the floor? Okay, Adam Walker, question. Just a second, Adam. Go for it.
Hi, great. Thanks very much, Becca. It's really great to hear about the strategy. I have a question about the Innovation Fund, which sounds really exciting. Can you give us some examples of how that's worked in other areas or how it might apply in MND?
Yeah, so we've done some research around different ways that innovation funds can be used to support research. There's been some really interesting programs that are being led out of ALS Canada, which is using key people in the MND community to identify really novel ideas and to then get them to sort of pitch their ideas to a panel of experts who will then select a couple of them to put forward. We've also talked with some research or some people at the Dottie Weir Foundation around some work they've done previously in another disease where they've looked at engaging industry and getting industry to sort of come along and hear some pitches about some exciting ideas. There's potential for co-funding between industries or venture philanthropy for exciting ideas. So we're still sort of shaping up what that could look like, but I think there's lots of exciting opportunities and sort of new different ways to invest in these, out of the box ideas.
Great, thanks very much.
Thanks, Adam. Just a reminder to please introduce yourself before you ask your question. So can we get Vivian? You should be able to turn on your mic. Vivian, you just need to unmute yourself.
I'm Vivian. I'm a physiotherapist with the respiratory hat from the WA association. The collaborations are so hard because we're so far away and it's so small. So I haven't got another grant ready to submit on Friday. But when is your next round? I think we'll miss this one.
For the care research grants, it will likely be this similar time next year.
So another year to go. Okay. We'll get ourselves organized. Thank you.
Yes, but please don't hesitate to send an email through if you've got sort of any questions or, if we can support in any way.
Yeah, so the whole brilliant. Yeah, thank you. It was really helpful. And you're kind of absolutely right on clinicians being just run off their feet. Writing things isn't, it doesn't fit into the daily clinical work. So thanks for highlighting that.
No, that's great. And this is the first year that we've run our care research grants. So if you have feedback on the submission process, application process, anything like that, we're very open to hearing that because we want to fund as much great care research that we can. So we're really relying on feedback from you guys about the best way to support it.
Yeah, I suppose the hardest thing is having kind of links to universities and establishing those if that's what you need. So that's, as a small association, coming for research to come from the association is haven't figured that out yet. So all good.
Great.
Thank you.
Let's have a chat offline about it, Vivian.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thanks, Vivian. Nicole, cheers.
Thanks, Beck. That was wonderful hearing about the work that's been done in both the cure and the care space and where it's kind of heading. This was a question out of interest because you mentioned that the IP and the barriers to contracts was, was something that has really been a hold up and that FightMND really, was a priority for you. Do you have any sense about what the barriers to the IP problems are?
I think often, we certainly have some challenges when we're looking at funding agreements using multiple institutions or universities who all have different different policies on data sharing or IP ownership and things like that. So I think probably the approach we'll be looking at is how we can sort of get come to an agreement that lots of organizations would be happy to agree to as kind of like a standard agreement. I think every institute is slightly different in the way that they want to protect IP. I know that things around the ethics and data ownership, even from a clinical perspective, something like SALSA, and I'm sure Anjali Henders can give you a lot of information about this, the challenges of that ownership of that sort of data that's attached to a big registry type project. I think, there's sort of a lot of some of the challenges that we've been hearing about.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. Shana should be able to jump on now, Shana.
Hi there. I'm a speech pathologist working in Royal Brisbane Hospital, MND clinic, and just following on from Vivian, a gap in the research and I don't know the way to fill it necessarily, but working with saliva management, it just strikes me that research going forward needs to collaborate between centres, across centres, and between, say, speech pathology, palliative care, and physio, and just having, so that in the bid stage of the process, people knowing who's where, who's doing what in other centres, and possibly collaborating, sharing skill. And I think a big issue for me in a centre where we see people once every 3 months, and then we give them recommendations and send them out into the community. The expertise is quite patchy out in the community with NDIS carers, different community allied health professionals, residential care facilities. So the people delivering the care are quite hard to find and separate. So a way of joining together good practice and models of training people to deliver those out in the community. And so I'm just trying to collaborate on that between centres, I guess, even at the stage of conceiving these research projects. So it's just putting out there a kind of a need that I perceive from a clinician point of view, and starting to do some postdoc research myself. So knowing who's who, who's where, and how to sort of collaborate at the stage of conceiving projects would be helpful. So it's just a thought.
No, that's super helpful to hear that. And I can see Nicole has her hand up, and I wonder if she's going to comment on FightMND is helping support a MND collective. I don't know if Nicole, if you want to jump in and answer.
Sorry, I was busy typing saying, can I respond, please? So sorry, I didn't introduce myself either. I did the unwritten rule of not introducing myself. So Shana, I'm Nicole Shears. I'm a respiratory physio and a clinician researcher in Melbourne. And I'm also, so as Beck says, between FightMND and MNDA, there's been established what's called the MND Research Collective. And within that, we have a clinical care driving team. And so one of the things we've identified within that is exactly what you've just mentioned about trying to really pull in all of the work that's existing, because we are sort of, there is this feeling that we're working in silos. And within that, one of the first projects we're working on is creating what's called a resource map. so that people, clinicians, researchers in this instance, and I know the discovery research team also has something similar, will be to be able to have a database essentially of the people and the kind of projects that are currently out there, so that if you know, well, who else is working in this space? Who else, can we collaborate with, both from a research and then moving forward towards the then delivering, finding clinicians out there as well. So stay tuned, and would be great to have yourself and people like that involved in that resource map once we get it up and running.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. Any other questions from the floor? So can I just ask, given that FightMND is looking to expand its investment more globally, given that we are an Australian-based organisation, how do we ensure that we maintain healthy support for our local research workforce?
Well, I think what we've done really with our strategy is we certainly have opportunities for international researchers to apply, and that's really because as an organisation, we don't really mind where that cure comes from as long as we get there as fast as possible. But we also understand the importance of building that research capability and capacity here in Australia. So it's about building that infrastructure here locally, and also supporting our workforce here locally as well.
Okay. If that's all the questions, I don't think there's any other questions from the floor. We might just leave it there for today then. If anyone does think of another question that they'd like to ask, please do get in touch with either Beck directly or myself, and I can pass on your query. Thank you. That was a really wonderful opportunity for our research community to learn about the process by which FightMND determines where it will invest its funds. So we have recorded Beck's presentation today, and it should be available on our seminar website in about a week's time. So please do check back and let any of your colleagues know who might have missed out, who might want to hear about it. So the scientific seminar will return to its regular programming next month, bringing you a presentation from a national leader in MND research. So please do join us on Tuesday, the 25th of July at 12 p.m. online. So until then, all the best with your work, and thank you so much for tuning in to hear about our research strategy today.